Would you like to have your fur babies join you when you come to Australia? Well then, keep watching. Hey guys, and welcome back to Chamonix TV. In today's video, I'm going to give you an overview of the process that is involved in getting your pooches and your canine furry friends over to Australia when you move here permanently. I have helped thousands of people in the past, and I would love to help you too today in making your dream life a reality over in Australia. But before we jump in, let's make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Have you hit that button yet? And also, can you hit the like button even before we start? Because I'm going to bring you awesome value in this video that you would not go without if you're planning on bringing your canine or your furry pooches with you all the way to Australia to come and live the dream life. All right, let's dive in. Here are the 6 things that you have to consider when making your move with your furry friends to Australia. Number 1 is the Australian migration requirements or the quarantining requirements for your furry friends when you want to bring them. There is a whole very formalized process involved in bringing your pooches, and I will give you a little bit of a glimpse into the different steps involved. But the things that you need to take into consideration when you want to find out what are the exact appropriate steps for your furry friends depends on the country that you'll be coming from. And South Africa falls in the category 3 of countries, and there are 20 steps involved for bringing a dog over, and there are 15 steps involved if you want to bring your cat over. Things that you need to take into consideration is the fact that there's only the one quarantine or import port in Australia, and that is in Melbourne. So regardless of where you are finally traveling your pooches to in Australia, they will all come in at Melbourne, and then they will be quarantined there for 10 days. You also need to take into consideration the fact that you have to have different tests done and vaccinations done for your animals, and that takes a lot of time. So for example, the rabies test for cats, they need to have that done between 180 days or 24 months even before the time of export to make sure that all of that is done within time by the time that you want to move your animals to Australia. In terms of the steps involved for dogs, I'll quickly run you through the steps one by one, but you'll have to go and read up for each specific item that you would like to know more about. The first one is to contact the competent authority. Of course, by the time that you decide you want to travel, that's the first thing you do is you contact the relevant authority and see what's involved and what are all the things that you'll need to do in this whole process. The second step is to confirm your general eligibility. The third step is to verify your existing microchip or implant a new microchip. The fourth thing is to check the rabies vaccinations for your pet. The fifth one is rabies neutralizing antibody titer test. Step 6, an official government vet must complete the rabies vaccination and the RNAT test declaration. Step 7, apply and pay for the import permit. Step 8, book a tentative post-entry quarantine accommodation and make your travel arrangements for the pets. Step 9, check other vaccinations. Step 10, external parasite treatments that will need to be done. Step 11, testing for Ehrlichia canis. If you can pronounce that one better than me, please let me know how that is said. Step 12, testing for Brucella canis. Step 13, testing for leishmaniosis or leishmaniosis. And step 15 is testing for leptospirosis. Woo, big words. Step 15, Babesia canis treatment, which is within 20 days before the date of export. Step 16 is an internal parasite treatment they will have to get. Step 17, your dogs will get the pre-export clinical examination. Step 18, completion of vet health certificate. Step 19 is they travel to Australia, and step 20 is their arrival in Australia. So yes, 20 steps, and that's for dogs. If you're from a group 3 country, which South Africa falls within. And cats have a similar kind of thing, but with their own tests and 15 steps, not 20 steps involved. So a long process, lots to do, lots to keep in mind and coordinate. Now, with all these steps involved, that means there will be a lot of costs too, because, nothing is for free these days. And so the things that you'll need to take into consideration for costs are, the first thing, your application cost for the, as I call it, the dog visa or the entry permit of your cat or your dog that comes into Australia. And at the time of this video, the first cat or dog cost to come into Australia, you have a lodgement price, an assessment fee, and then the total fee for that is $480 for the entry permit for your first animal. And then for each additional animal in the same consignment, so the same trip, will be $240. So $480 for the first one and $240 for the subsequent one. And this is just for the entry permit part of your animal's total migration costs. The other thing to keep in mind are the flight costs. Now, already to fly to Australia is an expensive thing to do. Keep in mind, COVID, not many planes, if any at all, and it has caused a massive bubble, inflating the prices so much with the cost of getting your animals to Australia. It has become such an issue for some people to get their animals here that they have decided to charter flights just to be able to get their pets from South Africa to Australia, for example. And there seems to be an issue with snub-nosed pets, cats and dogs. And there are people who are literally organizing charter flights to get their furry friends to Australia because they have been waiting so long and they're dearly missing them and concerned about their welfare in South Africa, wherever they're staying, in the interim while they're waiting to try and get a flight to come to Australia. And it's not only the flights that are really limited, it's also the entry into Australia at Melbourne. There has been a backup of animals that want to come in. And so keep these things in mind when you are planning your animal's migration to Australia. The other costs involved are the medical costs, like the vaccinations and the treatments they'll have to go through. So that's something else. It will be different for each pet because it'll depend on what your animal has had in the past or not had, and whether they have any other pre-existing conditions or extra tests that they will need to have done, and obviously which vet you go to. And then the last kind of cost that you'll have to keep in mind are the costs of where your pet will be staying before they come to Australia. So basically, all the time, if you travel before or after your pet for that period, that they will be needing to be housed somewhere when they're not with you at that point in time. The third thing to take into consideration is the general welfare of your animal. You know your pet the best. Do they have a strong personality? Are they easily scared when they see new people? Are they easygoing in new spaces? How do they travel when they're confined in a small space, like in a crate? How do you think they would go by being in the cargo hold of a plane? Because remember, this is the other reality. Pets don't usually go where the people go. They don't go and sit in a nice seat at the top and get a service by the air hostess. No, they literally go down in the cargo hold where the bags go. And so that can be a really scary process for them. You know whether your pet would be able to sustain through all of that. Also, something to consider is the age of your pet. There is no age limitation, by the way, for your pets to come into Australia. Unlike us humans, we need to not be certain ages for us to be able to come in. But for a pet, there's no age limitation, but there are health checks that needs to be done. And so if your pet have pre-existing conditions, those are the kinds of things that you'll need to take into consideration. and really think if it would be worth your pet's stress that they might be going through this process. Remember, it can be a really drawn out process, especially if you move to Australia before they do, and they might be stuck in South Africa in temporary accommodation because you cannot get a flight for them necessarily, or the flight gets cancelled, or there might be something that happens with their medical test and they might have to stay in their temporary accommodation for a longer period of time even. Do you think your pet would be okay with that? What's your general, as the parent of the pet or the owner, I like to think of us as parents of our pets, do you think your pet would be okay, or do you think it would be better off for them to be rehomed with another loving family, if that is a possibility on your end? Also, something to take into consideration is the fact that not all types of pets are able to come to Australia. You need to make sure that if it's a cat or a dog, obviously that should be okay, but other kinds of pets like horses and those kinds of animals have their own limitations and their own set of rules in regards to how they can or can't be brought into Australia, and you'll have to hop onto the department's website to get that specific information. The fourth thing to take into consideration is the time that you will take to travel to Australia, or when you will be traveling to Australia. Because regardless of when it is, there will be a period either before or after you travel that your animal will be without you. So if you come to Australia first and your dog, for example, stays in South Africa to have all those tests completed before they can get on the plane and come into Australia and have their import permit approved, then there will be a period that they will need to stay with someone else while you are in Australia. Likewise, if you're still in South Africa while the animals are still there and you're trying to align the dates that you're flying to Australia to be on the same plane or on the same, more or less. Now with COVID, I don't think it would ever be possible to get yourself and your animal on the same plane. But regardless, if you're managing to align that timing so that when you both leave, there will still be a period of time afterwards when you arrive in Australia that you will be without your pet. And of course, the first 10 days will be while your pet is still in the migration facility in Melbourne, where they are being quarantined and checked over for the 10 days. So if you cannot do it that way, if you come to Australia first and your animal stays in South Africa until they have either all their tests done or they're waiting for a flight, where will they be staying and with whom will they be staying? Do you have a friend or a family member where your animal can stay, somebody that they know, that they feel comfortable with, or would you have to look for a kennel for them to stay in the meantime? These are the things that you need to take into consideration. Also remembering that at the moment, with everything being up in the air with COVID, not knowing when we have planes in and out, and the possibility of medical emergencies or things that might come up, it might postpone or prolong the period of time that your animal will be in South Africa. And so that might rack up the costs, or if you're in a kennel, if the animal's in a kennel, or staying with another family or friend, whether they would be able to continue housing your dog as they wait for the period that your animal are able to come to Australia. The fifth thing to take into consideration is the type of animal that you will be bringing in. Now, Australia, as you will know, is the land of red tape and of rules and regulations. And there's a good reason why it is like that, because we are relatively free of a lot of the other diseases that tend to be in some of the other countries. And so when animals are brought into Australia, they need to go through a very strict process of checking that they don't bring any of those diseases onto our island down under, where we're trying to keep everything as safe and as disease-free as possible. Of course, we do have diseases, yes we do, but in a general sense, we're trying to keep it as good as possible for all our furry friends down here. And so not all animals are allowed in either. There are rules around the kinds of dogs, the kinds of breeds that are not allowed. For example, I know that pit bull terriers are on the list of dogs that are not allowed into Australia. So it's important that you check up to see what your animal's breed is and which ones are allowed into Australia before you just set on the journey of having all these things done. As I said, animals like horses, for example, have their own set of rules, and in general, most exotic pets are not allowed to be moved to Australia. And if you have specific reasons for wanting to import, then it becomes part, I think, of the sort of the zoo kind of category, and those people wanting to import their zoo-related animals have different rules for people who are just moving to Australia, migrating essentially, wanting to bring their furry friends or their pets along with them. The sixth and the last thing that you have to keep in mind is the setup that you will have once you arrive in Australia. Now, remember, at this point of filming the video, Australia is still very strict on its quarantining, and all passengers arriving into Australia need to, and I'm talking about the human passengers, need to stay in hotel quarantine for 2 weeks. And so if your pet for some reason was able to get on the same flight and they're only in the migration facility for 10 days in Melbourne, they'll be out of there before you're out of your migration facility, which is the 2 weeks in quarantine for yourself for COVID. So there will be a 4-day period that your animals will have to go somewhere, or somebody will need to have to collect them. Alternatively, if you arrange it where the animals stay in South Africa and you come first, then obviously you'll have that 2-week period in the hotel, not having to worry about what happens to your pets once they come out of the Melbourne facility. That said, as soon as you step out of your hotel quarantine, you need to find somewhere to go and stay. Now, whether you've booked yourself in an Airbnb or you're going to stay with friends or family, if you want to have your pooch with you, will need to work out whether you will actually be able to have your furry friend with you in the accommodation that you will be staying in. Not all Airbnbs, in fact, less than the majority of Airbnbs in Australia are not pet friendly, because it's just a matter of how they're set up. And if you are finding a rental for a longer period of time, like for 6 months or a year or so, those properties will also need to be pet friendly. And on top of that, you'll also need to get specific acceptance from the landlord that you are able to bring your animals along with you. And they generally would like to know what the ages are of the animals, how many pets do you have, and hopefully they will just say, no problem, you're allowed to keep your pets with you. So these are the kinds of things that you need to keep into consideration. At the moment, the rental market in Australia is really tough. COVID has changed the world upside down. Who would have expected things would have turned out this way? The thing here, if you come from another country, you don't already have references in place of having rented a space in Australia. And so it becomes a little bit harder to find your foot into the rental market at first. Probably best if your pets are still in South Africa while you go through this process and you manage to find a spot where it'll be okay if my animals come now and I'll have a nice space for them to run around in and for them to just live their best lives with you while you're living your best life in Australia. The last consideration as part of number 6 when you have your setup in Australia is to remember that pet insurance in Australia is rather expensive. And so obviously is going to the vet. So if you want to bring your animals along, always keep in mind that you're going to be paying for expensive insurance if you want to have insurance, or if not, if you just want to pay outright to go to the vet, the number of animals that you bring along with you will then increase in that kind of living costs that will be involved. Even though Australia is a really lovely, pet-friendly kind of country, it does add to your overheads, and it's something to keep in mind, especially if you're bringing more than one or so pet with you to come and spend the time in Australia. Now, the question of the day that I have for you is, what kind of animal are you hoping to bring with you when you make the move to Australia? Is it only one? Is it 2? Cats? Dogs? What kind of breed do you have? Write it in the comments below, and I would love to read on what your furry friends look like and their ages and how many you would like to bring with you to your dream job, dream land, dream country, dream life here in Australia. If you have liked this video and you're still watching, I'm assuming that you have found it valuable, and I would certainly appreciate if you can hit that button, if you can subscribe, and then, you know what, share it with a friend, because there might be other people like you who would love to have an overview of what's involved in bringing your animals to Australia. You'll make their day by giving them this piece of information. Join me on my website, chamonixtv.com.au, if you want to join and continue the conversation over there. There's also always lots of new things that we put out, lots of new content, more content like this coming as well on the channel. Every week we'll be bringing you lots of tips and bits on how to design and plan your best life to make it as soon as possible into Australia. And also remember that you only have this one life, this one go, except if you're a cat, because then you've got 9. But you only have this one opportunity to live your best life. And you deserve a life of freedom, of fairness, and of opportunity. So why don't you make sure that you get your bum in Australia as soon as possible and make your life worth the while. I'll see you in the next video. Adios, amigos.